The bulldozer roared like thunder across Grandpa's farm, metal jaws tearing through fences, splintering wood, and crushing decades of memories beneath its steel teeth. Crops that had fed the family for generations were reduced to dust in seconds. Dust and debris swirled in the air as the HOA president's voice cut through it all. "This land was never yours. You don't belong here." I stood silently, arms crossed, my heart pounding, watching the destruction with a calm I didn't feel. Every smashed plank, every trampled row of corn, felt like a punch to the gut, but I knew patience was my weapon. The neighbors had gathered, some horrified, some cheering quietly for the bulldozers, but none knew the truth hidden in my briefcase, the documents, the deeds, the proof that would not only stop them, but destroy their lives entirely. They thought this was intimidation. They had no idea. I was ready. Before we dive in, drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story of courage travels. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button and subscribe. Grandpa had bought this farm decades ago, right after his military service, building it from the ground up with sweat, pride, and a vision for family legacy. Every fence post, every row of corn, every wooden barn beam held memories of birthdays, harvests, and quiet Sunday mornings watching the sunrise. It wasn't just land, it was history, honor, and the proof of decades of hard work. I had been deployed overseas, serving my country while this farm remained my family's heartbeat. Returning home, I expected the familiar smell of earth and hay, the warmth of Grandpa's stories, but instead, I was greeted by chaos. Bulldozers tore through the fields, animals scattered, fences lay splintered, and the barn I had climbed as a child now crumbled under steel jaws. The HOA president stood nearby, arms crossed, shouting orders like a tyrant surveying conquered land. Notices had piled up in the mailbox, fines and threats for imaginary violations, claims of overstepping boundaries, all designed to intimidate. Some neighbors watched silently, unsure, while others whispered their approval, siding with the HOA's so-called authority. But I wasn't powerless. Hidden in my briefcase were deeds, old maps, and documents Grandpa had carefully preserved, proof that this land was ours, legally and morally. Every act of intimidation, every bulldozer strike, only strengthened my resolve. They thought they could break us, but they had no idea of the fight they had provoked. The destruction hadn't stopped. Every morning, the rumble of bulldozers was a reminder that the HOA believed they could erase decades of hard work with a few strokes of machinery. Notices were plastered across the mailbox and the front gate, fines for illegal structures, citations for overgrown vegetation, and threats of further action if I didn't vacate the land. Some claimed I was trespassing on HOA property, as if decades of ownership meant nothing. Neighbors came and went, whispering as they watched the chaos unfold. A few voiced quiet support, but most were too afraid to stand against the HOA's authority. The president strutted across the property like a general surveying conquered territory, her heels clicking against the broken fence. Every shout, every order, was designed to humiliate, to make me feel small and powerless. I stayed calm. Every document Grandpa had preserved, the deeds, old maps, proof of federal protections tied to military service, was safely tucked away. I knew that patience would be my weapon. The HOA thrived on intimidation, on quick, emotional reactions. If I let anger control me now, they would win. Instead, I observed, documented, and prepared. Then came the whispers from the neighborhood. Some locals began questioning the HOA's actions. A retired farmer approached me quietly one evening, shaking his head. "They've gone too far," he muttered. "This isn't right." Others nodded, but fear kept them silent. Still, the momentum was shifting, and I could feel the tension building, like a storm waiting to break. The HOA president escalated too. On one particularly tense afternoon, she stood atop the remains of a smashed fence, shouting at me in front of the gathered neighbors, accusing me of criminal trespassing and claiming the property had been mismanaged. Her voice dripped with condescension, and she laughed as if the entire community agreed with her. I remained silent, letting her words hang in the air, my calm expression a stark contrast to the chaos around us. Every act of aggression, every attempt to humiliate me in public, only strengthened my resolve. I could feel the shift. The community's eyes were starting to notice, the whispers growing louder, and most importantly, the power of truth waiting in my hands. They thought they could break me with noise and intimidation. They had no idea what was coming. The sun rose over what was left of Grandpa's farm, casting long shadows across broken fences and flattened crops. Bulldozers had already claimed large sections of the field, and the barn, which had stood proudly for decades, now leaned precariously, its roof partially caved in. The air was thick with dust and the smell of splintered wood. The HOA president strode across the devastation, her voice booming as she ordered workers to push further into the property. "Move faster! Tear it all down! He doesn't belong here," she shouted, pointing directly at me. Some neighbors watched silently, others muttered their disapproval, but fear kept most from stepping in. I stood a few feet away, calm and steady, my military discipline guiding my every move. In one hand, I held my grandfather's deeds, maps, and official documents, proof of every boundary, every law that protected this land. In the other, my camera quietly recorded the destruction, every broken fence, every bulldozed crop, every moment of the HOA president's arrogance. A bulldozer operator hesitated, looking back at me. "Are you sure we should keep going?" he muttered. The HOA president barked at him, but I caught the doubt in his eyes, a small crack in their armor. The president noticed me documenting everything and her anger intensified. She marched directly to me, pointing a finger in my face. "You think this paperwork will save you? This land is mine now," she screamed. Her voice carried across the property, echoing off the damaged barn walls. A few neighbors gasped. The tension in the air was almost tangible. But I didn't flinch. I had learned patience overseas, in situations far deadlier than this, and I knew that control was my advantage. I calmly replied, "I will take you to court. Every violation, every forged document, everything you've done will be exposed." My words were measured, but the weight of my promise hung heavier than any bulldozer could. She laughed, dismissive, sure of her victory, and waved the operator forward. Steel teeth ground into wood and earth, tearing up decades of labor. I crouched to photograph the destruction up close, capturing every detail, the splintered beams, crushed cornstalks, the look of triumph on her face. Every click of my camera was a testament, a record that would become unbreakable evidence. The neighbors began to murmur, some showing quiet support, others whispering fearfully. I caught the eye of a few older locals, their faces reflecting doubt about the HOA's morality. Even in her fury, the president could see the shifting tide. Her confident posture faltered for a split second. Hours passed like this, HOA aggression met with my silent but deliberate documentation. Every action she took, every attempt to intimidate me, was captured. And all the while, I remained calm, my hands steady, my mind focused. They believed they had power, that they could crush me with machinery and threats. But each hammer strike, each fallen fence post, only strengthened the truth that I carried. By the time the sun began to dip, the farm lay in partial ruin, but the real battle had already begun, not with bulldozers, but in the records I had secured, the images I had captured, and the courtroom that awaited. The stage was set. The courtroom was silent as I placed the thick folder on the judge's bench. Every document, every photograph, every historical record meticulously organized, Grandpa's legacy preserved in paper, ink, and evidence. The HOA president, once so arrogant and domineering on the farm, now sat rigidly, her confident mask starting to crack. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "this farm has been in my family for decades. These documents prove legal ownership, federal agricultural protections, and Grandpa's military land grant. Every action taken by the HOA, the fines, the bulldozing, the threats, was in direct violation of the law." The judge lifted his eyes, scanning the documents carefully. The courtroom felt heavy, every spectator leaning forward. A map revealed the exact boundaries of the farm, historical deeds tracing ownership back to Grandpa's post-World War II military service, and federal protections applied specifically because of its agricultural and historical significance. Every forged HOA claim was exposed in black and white. The HOA president's face went pale. Her lawyer whispered frantically in her ear, trying to salvage the situation, but the evidence was irrefutable. Her attempts to intimidate me, to bully neighbors, to misrepresent property lines, every single one laid bare. I watched her flinch as the weight of her deceit became undeniable. Neighbors who had been quietly observing the proceedings gasped. Whispers spread across the courtroom, shock, disbelief, and finally, admiration. Some of the same people who had hesitated on the farm now nodded at me in respect. Even the retired farmer who had spoken to me before the demolition stood tall, pride in his eyes. I continued calmly, presenting the photographic evidence: bulldozed fences, destroyed barns, flattened crops. Each image was a punchline in a case that spoke louder than any shouting, any intimidation, or any threats the HOA had deployed. It was all recorded, all verifiable, and all completely undeniable. A hush fell when I introduced the final piece of proof, a government-issued land grant tied to Grandpa's military service. The judge held it in his hands, the scale of the HOA's violations clear. The president's arrogance melted away, replaced by panic and disbelief. Her voice faltered, her posture sagged, and for the first time, the community saw her as she truly was, not a powerful authority, but a fraud exposed. The courtroom tension was palpable. Then came the silence, the kind that hits harder than any scream. Every eye was on the judge, waiting, knowing that the moment of reckoning had arrived. And in that silence, the shift was complete. Power had changed hands, not through violence or anger, but through truth, patience, and proof. I sat back, calm, letting the weight of the evidence speak for itself. The HOA president's attempts to intimidate and humiliate had failed. The documents, photographs, and history carried more power than any bulldozer, any shout, any forged notice. And in that courtroom, for the first time, everyone could see the strength that comes not from brute force, but from knowledge, preparation, and unwavering resolve. The courtroom held its breath as the judge adjusted his glasses and began speaking. Every person in the room leaned forward, neighbors, HOA staff, even journalists who had quietly documented the events. The weight of decades of injustice and months of intimidation had come to this single moment. After reviewing all submitted evidence, the judge's voice rang out, clear and authoritative. It is evident that the property in question has been owned by the plaintiff's family since post-World War II. The documentation provided, including federal land grants tied to military service and verified agricultural protections, confirms uninterrupted legal ownership. Any actions taken by the HOA, including fines, threats, and demolition, are hereby nullified and considered unlawful. A ripple of shock swept through the courtroom. The HOA president froze mid-breath, her face paling as the words sank in. Her smug smile, which had once been her armor, dissolved entirely. The bulldozers, if they were still operating, would have seemed insignificant in comparison to the weight of the judge's declaration. I remained seated, calm and steady, though my chest thumped with a mix of adrenaline and relief. Every piece of evidence, the maps, the photographs of the destroyed barn and fences, the official deeds, the federal protections, had spoken louder than the arrogance of the HOA. They had tried to bully, to humiliate, and to rewrite history, but truth was unstoppable. The judge continued, outlining the consequences. The HOA board members directly responsible for these actions are fined and placed under investigation for fraudulent property claims and intimidation. All demolition activity is permanently halted. The property shall be fully restored to the rightful owners, and restitution for damages will be determined. Murmurs erupted across the courtroom. Some neighbors gasped, others whispered excitedly, and a few even stood to applaud quietly. Those who had remained silent during the farm's destruction now witnessed the full reversal of power. The community, which had once been divided by fear and hesitation, began to align with justice. The HOA president sat stunned, her lawyer fumbling through papers, trying desperately to find a loophole, but there was none. Every attempt at intimidation, every forged map, every false citation, laid bare for all to see. She finally leaned back in her chair, defeated, her arrogance shattered, her authority revoked in the eyes of the public she had tried to dominate. Outside the courtroom, the reaction was immediate. Community members flooded the property, some to help repair the damage, others to express solidarity. Cameras documented every moment, capturing the emotional triumph as neighbors who had once hesitated now cheered for the veteran who had fought not with fists but with evidence, intelligence, and relentless determination. I walked onto the property, surveying what remained of the barn and fences. The sight of the damaged farm still tugged at my heart, but it also reminded me of the journey we had endured. Every broken plank, every flattened crop, had been transformed into a symbol of resilience. With the judgment in hand, the land was no longer just a battlefield, it was a monument to persistence, to truth, and to justice. Even the former HOA president was escorted off the property under the watchful eyes of the authorities. Her attempts at power had collapsed entirely. I watched as her figure receded, a stark contrast to the strength, dignity, and honor that had been restored to my family's legacy. The farm, though battered, stood under the bright sunlight, a testament that no force, no matter how aggressive or arrogant, could permanently erase what was rightfully ours. I raised my gaze to the horizon, where the sun glinted off the damaged barn, and felt the weight of victory settle over me. This wasn't just about a farm, it was about defending legacy, upholding truth, and showing the world that courage backed by justice could overturn even the most oppressive forces. Neighbors and family approached, some tearing up, others clapping, and I realized that this moment wasn't mine alone. It belonged to Grandpa, to every family member who had worked the land, and to every person who had ever been silenced by those who wielded power without conscience. The bulldozers were gone, the court had spoken, and justice had finally been served. Power had shifted. Truth had triumphed. And on that battered yet resilient farm, the legacy of my family, and the proof of our rightful claim, stood taller than any threat the HOA had ever imagined. Weeks after the courtroom victory, the farm began to breathe again. Neighbors came together, helping to rebuild the fences, replant crops, and repair the barn. The scars of destruction remained, but they were no longer symbols of intimidation, they were reminders of resilience, truth, and justice. A sign was placed at the entrance, legacy protected, honoring the land and those who served. Grandpa's name was engraved proudly, a permanent testament to decades of dedication and sacrifice. Walking the fields, I felt a deep connection, not just to my family, but to every person who had been silenced or threatened by abuse of power. The HOA president faced legal consequences. Her board was dissolved, fines imposed, and fraudulent actions officially recorded. The community, once divided by fear, now stood united in respect for the rule of law and the courage of a single man who refused to be intimidated. I often paused on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the sun hit the restored fields. The land wasn't just restored, it was alive with history, honor, and promise. Every plank rebuilt, every crop replanted, was a victory over greed, arrogance, and lies. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Power may try to bulldoze legacy, and fear may try to silence courage, but the truth, backed by evidence and perseverance, always stands taller. Some tried to destroy our past, but justice, and the spirit of those who defend it, could never be torn down. The farm, the family legacy, and the proof of what is right had endured, and in doing so, had set an example for everyone watching, that no one can take what is yours when truth and courage guide your fight.